Have you seen the movie King Arthur, Legend of the Sword? If you haven't, allow me to ruin it for you. And if you have, ignore what you saw. I think I could tell a better story than the Academy Award winning director who directed the movie. All right, so these are the characters in the movie that you have to listen for. There is Uther, who's the king. There is Vortigern, who's the king's brother. And then there is Arthur, who's the king's son. And then there's the sword. We can't forget the sword. The sword is important to the story as well. So the movie begins with a big fight between Mordred and Uther, Uther's kingdom, which is Camelot. So Vortigern is Uther's brother, right? He was so jealous, consumed by jealousy that his brother was the king. He believed that he could do a better job than his brother. So he decides to align himself with dark forces. So those dark forces together, they decided they were going to take over Camelot. So Uther, they forgot to account for the sword. The sword is enchanted to the Pendragon bloodline. So it can literally be activated, and it's stronger than anything, any power on earth. They forgot to account for that, the sword. So Uther fights Mildred, and he defeats Mildred. But now there's still the brother. The brother is still jealous that his brother is king. So he decides to take matters into his own hands and fight for Camelot, fight and kill his brother himself. So he aligns himself with the dark forces again. They give him power. He becomes a monster. So the night of the fight, Uther decides to take his wife and his son, Arthur, to safety. So they were going to go underground and they were going to get in the skiff and run away. So while they were not run away, he was going to get his family to safety while he fights. So while they were trying to get away, Vortigern comes and kills Uther's wife, which is Arthur's mother. She's dead now. So Uther now has to stay and fight. Now there's a son, right? The son is already in the skiff. So the skiff is floating away while they're fighting, while his father and his brother are fighting. So the king is losing to his brother because the brother is so powerful due to the dark forces. So when he realizes this, he throws the sword up and the sword pierces his heart from the back, and then he solidifies into stone. And then the stone cracks and it's now underwater. No one can see it with the sword. So nobody can withdraw the sword from the stone now because it's only activated by the Pendragon bloodline. This sword is very important, and the story as well. So Arthur, being a very, very young kid, floats in the skiff to the brothel. And some prostitutes found him and they raised him. So now he has to figure out his way in the brothel in this harsh environment. So he learns the way of the streets of the brothel, and he's now become somewhat of a king in the brothel. So no one can come and do business without actually going through Arthur, right? Arthur and his friends. Can you believe this? A little boy that's supposed to be king, supposed to be pampered, becomes king in the brothel. So he still doesn't know who he is because whatever happened to him happened at a very young age that's locked in his cortex where he can't even access it. So that's beside the point. So he's raised by prostitutes. He becomes the king of the brothel, right? And now eventually he becomes of age, and then the sword reveals itself. So the legend starts to go around town that his uncle is actually not the king, that the actual king, the real born king, is coming. Vortigern being upset about this news, he couldn't stand that his people don't respect him anymore, the people don't want to bow down to him anymore, decides to have everybody of his nephew's age come and test to pull the sword out of the stone. Everybody comes, they're trying, blah, blah, blah. Arthur now comes, who is his nephew. He doesn't know this. So Arthur comes, put his two hands on the sword, he pulls the sword out, and then he collapses because the power of the sword has overpowered him. It's nothing he's seen before. So he's passed out. He doesn't know what's going on. They put him in a cell. And while he's in the cell, his uncle sends his blacklegs, they call them, they're like police, sends them to go and raid his home in the brothel and figure out who this man is So this is the best part, I think, in the movie. So you got to listen. So while he's in the cell, he's still passed out. He wakes up and he wakes up to his uncle sitting in front of him. And the uncle is telling him, so you're my nephew. And he's affirming to his uncle, listen, I am the bastard son of a prostitute. I was raised in a brothel. I don't know who you're talking to. And he just kept saying that to his uncle. His uncle said, that's not true, because the sword can only be pulled and activated by a Pendragon bloodline. So the thing is, the sword would have yielded to his uncle had his uncle killed him. But his uncle didn't want to kill him in the cell. He wanted to make it known to the public that his nephew is a nobody. His nephew cannot rule, whatever. So it's kind of like this egotistical thing. So while they're having the conversation, his nephew's like, that's Arthur. He's like, listen, Your Highness, I could just go away and you would never hear from me. I'm like, yeah, right. We know your character. Anyway, but his uncle was like, his uncle says, we've seen what you've done. I've had my people scraping the brothel. We've known what you've acquired. I will believe that. This is me paraphrasing. He's like, I would believe that if your character showed me different. This is what we mean by people of character. You can tell who they are. It's in their demeanor. Like if you see someone that's good, that's of character, that can defend themselves, that's upholding, you know who that person is. So that's the same thing with Arthur. So his uncle is telling him, I know who you are. I know you're not going to go away silent. So I'm going to humiliate you, and the people are going to know exactly who you are. So instead of him to kill him in the cell, he decides he's going to perangulate his nephew in the square and have the people come out and watch the crucifixion of his nephew. So this is another favorite part of my movie. So while his uncle is standing up and the Blacklegs are holding his nephew and they're pushing him through the stone where they're just going to put his head and just chop it. So he's affirming to himself. He's like, I will show the people power. I'll show them strength. They will fear me. Fear is a good thing. I cannot believe I memorized this. So good. Anyway, so, and then he says about his nephew, he says, you will show the people weakness. You tell them lies. You show them everything that's wrong, blah, 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 blah. So he's affirming. While he's in the middle of all his affirmations, the mage comes out of nowhere and she saves Uther. Chaos ensues. There's a fight. Uther is saved and the sword is taken. So now Uther is in the forest with the mage. And now, sorry, I said Uther. Arthur is in the forest with the mage. And now he must find himself. He must truly know who he is in order to conquer his uncle and take his place as king in Camelot. Now, it's similar to the Lion King story I told in one of my videos. You have to go back and watch. I don't know what I named them. This is why you name your videos good names, right? So he goes into the forest. He's still resisting. He still thinks he's not this king. So he has to overcome that. The way he overcomes it is that his uncle has pushed him to the edge to where he must stand up and defend this land, because now he has nothing to go back to. They've killed the prostitute that raised him. They've killed his friends. So he literally has nothing to go back to. And if he's going to go back, he must go back as king. So he decides to go and fight his uncle. He goes, he fights, and he defeats his uncle. But before he lets his uncle go, he answered that question in the cell that the uncle asked him. The uncle asked him, what drives you? So he finally says, you are what drives me. You put me in that brothel. You cut me off on the street. You made life hard for me. And now I must repay you. And he killed his uncle. So here is the moral of the story. The moral of the story, if you're like self-reliant like me, you understand that Arthur is the main character. Uther and Vortigern are sort of like conscious mind and subconscious mind, meaning they are a projection of Arthur's reality or Arthur's perception, whatever you want to call it. So nothing is really happening outside of himself. So it's a battle with self, right? And the sword is the power that you must earn for you to be able to conquer this world that we're living in, right? Or conquer, which the world that we live in is truly, truly, truly a world within yourself, because we have this battle within ourselves. Are we good enough? Are we blah, blah, blah? And then we search outside of ourselves for validation, right? So him becoming the king of the brothel was that he wanted to become something because his uncle cut him off on the streets. His uncle put him in the brothel. So anyway, so my explanation of that is that his father is the intelligent side of himself that he must put aside, right? To go around and fight these battles, whatever battles it is. So like, think about it this way. If you struggle, we all are addicted in some way to something. And we all know what our addictions are. Some people are addicted to overeating. So some people are addicted to alcohol, cigars, whatever it is that you might call it. Put that addiction as Vortigern, right? Vortigern trying to take over the intelligent side of yourself, the intelligent side that knows that this is not good for you. But you must experience this addiction for you to know that you must let them go in order to truly, truly, truly become who you are. The intellectual side of yourself doesn't necessarily have to play any kind of role. They could be dead forever, but this is the battle you have to fight in life. So that's my explanation of it. So you fight a battle, whatever addiction it is that you're having, and it's not necessarily an addiction. It's some obsessive behavior. If you have an obsessive behavior, that's what the representation of his uncle is in the story. You fight that, and eventually you come to a circle where it's you. Now, some people might just look at it and say, oh, it's just a fight game, blah, 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 blah. It's okay too. You can look at the movie literally, but if you are sort of like, it's in every story actually, it's the hero's journey. The hero is born, right? He goes and he conquers his demons. He comes back and he takes his place as king. So eventually, after we're done fighting all of this, eventually we're going to come back to ourselves and affirm to ourselves that who we are is enough, is enough. So what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is whatever path you're on right now, it's your journey. It's who you're supposed to be. Accept it, fight it, conquer it, and eventually you become who you are. I'll see you in the next episode.